Hi, everyone. Welcome to our last in the How to Connect webinar series. We are really excited that you're here tonight. And tonight we have Rebekah Pointer Adderley, Professor of Speech Communications, who's going to be here with us to talk about the First Amendment.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you. I'm super excited. Thank you so much for inviting me. And so I guess we'll just jump right in.
Let's do it.
Okay. So, of course, the topic of today's webinar is First Amendment. We're going to talk about protections, limitations, and then some of the communication ethics of being a public speaker and making public statements. So first, let's talk briefly about what the First Amendment is. And as I go through these slides, I'll kind of point out the sources. So if anyone wants to go and do additional research, definitely be my guest. So the First Amendment, basically it guarantees freedoms concerning religion, expression, the right to assembly, the right to peacefully protest or petition. It forbids Congress from both promoting one religion over other religions and also restricting an individual's religious practices. It guarantees freedom of expression by prohibiting Congress from restricting the press or the rights of individuals to speak freely. And it also guarantees the right of citizens, like I said, to assemble peacefully and petition their government. So if you want more information on that, there's several sources. This one came from Cornell Law School, but also the next slide has some of the other sources that I've used for this presentation. So some of the experts that I found were the Freedom Forum Institute. We have the First Amendment Center, the National Communication Association, or the NCA, and then we have the Public Speaking Project. And so let's talk first about some examples. So
I'm really glad that you have this one in here because I hear people say this all the time. Oh, I got banned from Facebook. That's a violation of my First Amendment. Is that right?
Yes, that is no. And it's funny because a lot of people do think that being banned from social media is a violation of your First Amendment rights. But there's the terms that you have to agree to when you sign up for Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media platform you use. And if you violate their terms, then they have a right to terminate your account. So as we said with the previous slide, the First Amendment protects you from government censoring or punishing or oppressing of your speech. But social media platforms are private companies and you have to adhere to their terms. And so this is more information on this you could find with the First Amendment Center. And so just to kind of sum that one up, it doesn't apply to private organizations and it's not the government censoring you. It's that private company making sure that you adhere to their standards.
So until the government owns Facebook.
Right. Right. So if the government takes over Facebook, then you'd probably have a case if you want to take it to court. Okay. So the next what if you get fired from your job because you say something publicly or online and your job, they don't approve of what you did or said. And so they fire you. So a few things to keep in mind. If it is a private company, it's probably not a First Amendment issue because the company has a right to discipline their employees' speech. So if it's a private company, they're not the government. Now, if it's a private employer, it doesn't mean they have free reign to do whatever they want to do. Depending on why they fired you and what was said or done to cause the firing, that they could be violating the Civil Rights Act. And if that is the case, then you could say you were not necessarily your First Amendment rights were violated, but other rights could have been violated. And then also, what does the contract say? So if you have a contract and you violate the terms of your contract with your employer, that's one thing. But if they fire you and they're in violation of their own contract, then that's a different issue. So let's look at an example. And if you're a government employee or if it's a public company, it's a little bit more complicated. So let's look at a Google engineer. who was a male, and he, in a memo, argued that women are not biologically fit for roles in tech. So this is not a First Amendment issue. He got fired, but it wasn't because of the First Amendment, because the government was not involved.
That was Google, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So the government was not involved, but Google as a company, he violated their, company morals. The company has an image they like to uphold, and they have certain ideals. And if you do things that are in violation of that, then they have the right to let you go. And that kind of stuff is typically included in a contract. So, but think about like a police department or a public school or a government branch. They can't necessarily restrict their employees' speech rights, but you have to make sure that the things that you say don't affect your ability or show that you are unable to do your job. So if you're a police officer and you make disparaging comments about certain groups of people, you are free to say that, but your employer then has to think about, are you going to be able to be fair and unbiased in how you deal with different people or different communities or different situations. So that's where it gets a little bit complicated.
Or if it hurts their bottom line. I mean, if they lose money over it, they're not going to be happy.
And that's what it's really about. I mean, if you think about companies who had CEOs or people affiliated with those companies, they do things and then all of the advertisers pull out and they start losing money. They will get rid of you really fast. Like the fastest way to lose your job, I don't care how famous, how important you are, you make your company lose a lot of money, they're going to get rid of you. So, let's see. Another example. So you are at a university or a college, and there's a speaker coming to your campus, and it's a very controversial speaker. And then the campus decides to cancel the speaking engagement, and maybe there's like really bad, the students are protesting, they're really upset about the speaker. Here are a few things to keep in mind. Is it a public institution or a private institution? If it's private, it's probably not a First Amendment issue. Public institutions, the lines get a little bit blurred because let's say the speaker is coming and there's a very large protest. The school can cancel the speaking engagement or relocate that engagement due to safety concerns. So in that instance, they are not affecting, it's not because of the First Amendment rights, it's about a safety concern for students. There's a big protest and they're concerned that if this speaker comes, something will happen, and then it's a liability for the college.
It's been so interesting doing this webinar series because I think every time we do one of these, this just happens to be in the news. TCU just had this issue.
Really?
Not even 3 weeks ago, maybe? They had a man on campus, I forget which organization he's from, and he had a big sign that said, "There's no rape culture, change my mind."
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And that's a whole lot of issues there because it's a private university. They didn't invite him. He just showed up.
Oh, yeah. And it gets really, really tricky because you have student organizations, and the student organizations may want to bring certain speakers in, but depending on what kind of student organization it is, I mean, there's so many different situations that happens so often with colleges because, students are adults, free thinkers. They have different views and opinions, and you want to bring your speaker in, but then there's backlash, and the colleges don't want negative press. So it's going to be in the news. So yeah, a little bit of damage control. Let's see. Okay, how about this next one? So what if you get arrested for criticizing the government? That is a definite violation of your First Amendment rights, unless you're trying to incite violence and the words that you say must be considered a true threat, not just something that people don't take seriously. And that's kind of a gray area because, a threat is a threat, but the court would have to find or would have to believe that it was a true threat. For example, during the Vietnam War, a man was giving a speech, and he said if he got drafted, his first bullet would be for then President Lyndon B. Johnson. Now, the courts ruled that that was not a true threat. And they said, based on the context, it was more hyperbole, and the audience took it as a joke, and the audience laughed, and it was clearly a joke. And if he was going to meet with LBJ the next day, then it would have been a true threat. But
because he would have had the opportunity to follow through.
Yes, absolutely. So, kind of a gray area. So yes, I mean, it has to be a true threat. So you can criticize the government, you could say things about the government, but if it's determined that you're trying to incite violence, or that there's an actual possibility that you'll come face to face with the government officials that you said things about, that you wanted to do things to, then that would be something that you could possibly be arrested for. So interesting. Now here's another one. You are posting online and your post or your comments are deleted from an online forum. And again, this is going back to the whole, it's a private company. Websites can remove content that they don't like. If it doesn't meet their standards or their terms of use, they can take something off. And I recently heard someone say that technology has not really caught up, or our laws haven't really caught up with technology, because technology has kind of given us all these new situations that weren't there 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so even like if someone makes a threat, if it's a threatening Facebook post versus a verbal threat versus, a threatening letter, things like that. So, so they can delete your comments. So if you put something online in a chat room or a post comment section, the social media platform, they can remove your comments.
And most of the time, don't they say like, this is our terms of use and this is
absolutely
the standard we hold you to?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
it's not usually arbitrary.
Right. And people don't read a lot of times, like the terms.
That is true.
Like, I'm going to get on Facebook and then just click all the boxes and like, yay, now it's the fun part, upload your picture. But all that legal wording that you go through when you start a new social media account, that it's typically in there. So yeah. Okay. So here's another one. This one is really interesting to me. You're arrested for videotaping a police officer. Now, in this situation, it's, if you're only videotaping, that is a violation of your rights. But if you are doing something illegal while you're filming, then they can arrest you, and it's not a violation of your rights.
So if I'm breaking into a house, but I'm filming,
right,
that would be my get out of jail free card.
Yes. And if you're
that makes sense.
Threats at the police officer. So the best bet, if you're going to do that, be out of the way so they can't say you're obstructing or, disturbing the crime scene. You shouldn't yell things, like threatening things. But in some cases, people have been yelling at an officer saying things like, stop, what are you doing? And you're yelling. And so if it's a perceived threat, that could be a gray area, because in the heat of the moment, do they know that you're yelling, like what your intentions are? Or if someone wanted to take advantage of the fact that you're videotaping and you're yelling, they could say, oh, they were yelling and being belligerent and they led me to believe. I mean, there's so many kind of gray areas in there.
Do you think this is another case of our laws have not caught up yet?
Absolutely. Yes. Because this, the phenomena of the cell phone recording things as they happen and being broadcasted live, that is totally a new thing that's happened within the past, 5 years, maybe 10, definitely 5 years.
Yes, probably 5.
Yeah.
Since cell phones got good, right? And you could actually see what's on the video.
Yes, good camera quality. I never used the camera on my old cell phones. When I had the Nokia, like in the 90s.
I don't even think mine had a camera.
That's true. You know what? I don't think it did. You're right. I think when flip phones came out, then they had cameras. So yeah, there's that. So this is definitely a new thing. And, yes, you can videotape. If you're doing something that violates the law while you're videotaping, then that is grounds for being arrested. But again, there have been times where people have been yelling at officers, and the things that they are yelling is not intended to be a threat, but it could be perceived as a threat. Or if the person doesn't want to be videotaped, they could say, well, it seems like a threat to me. We're all going to jail. Come on, let's go. So, I mean, they wouldn't say it like that. They wouldn't be that pleasant. But so there's kind of, some clarification on that one. And so that wraps up the portion from the First Amendment Center. And again, if you want more information on what we just talked about, the First Amendment Center and the Freedom Forum Institute, they have tons of really, really, really great content. So the next part I want to talk about briefly is the communication study side of it, communication ethics, and the NCA, which is the National Communication Association.
Before we get into that, can you just briefly explain what communication studies is for those of us who don't have a background in that?
Yes. So communication studies it has lots of different areas that it covers, but the basics of it can be just human interaction. This specific webinar would be specifically geared towards maybe the oratory, public speaking, but also because there's technology, computer mediated communication, things you post online and things like that. So human interactions, how we send messages and receive messages, how we construct those messages, what channels we use, computer.
So it's not just speech class.
Oh, absolutely not. No. And if you've taken speech class at TCC, then you probably know that. But if you have not taken speech class yet, when you do take speech class, it is not just giving speeches. And I have a lot of students that say, well, I thought we were just going to give speeches all day. And that is not the case. But they're usually pleasantly surprised because there's a lot of really good information that we cover. So this will be, again, lining up with the oral communication and computer mediated communication. So that'll be the context for this next part.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So the National Communication Association, also known as the NCA, they suggest that communicators should be committed to following principles of ethical communication. And they have a credo of ethical communication, and they say that ethical communication is fundamental to responsible thinking, decision-making, and the development of relationships and communities within and across contexts, cultures, channels, and media. And ethical communication also yields positive outcomes like truthfulness, respect, and accuracy of information. So even when you watch the news or you're listening to a political speech, ethical communication should have these positive outcomes. Like they should be truthful, they should be respectful, the information should be accurate.
Do you believe that always happens?
Oh gosh, no. I personally love looking at fact checker websites, especially during when it's campaign season and candidates are doing debates and stuff like that. I love the fact checker sites because you can usually catch the lie right there when they say it. So there have been several really high profile debates where candidates have actually had fact checkers, like a fact check site embedded in their campaign site, which is really interesting. And so it kind of holds you accountable. I would like to see, because we have so much technology, I would like to see the fact checking done on the spot and not after
like a little ticker tape that goes across the bottom.
Yes. I would like the moderators to call them out and say, you just said XYZ. We have the video tape of you, we have the tape, we have the receipts, as they say. We have this information that contradicts what you just said. And then let them kind of sweat it out. And, are you going to say, yes, I lied? Are you going to try to spin it? They'll probably try to spin it. But I love fact checking. So we'll see if that ever happens. But when you are preparing to give a presentation, they recommend that you set a responsible speech goal. And this is from the Public Speaking Project. Public speakers should set responsible speech goals, things like promoting diversity, using inclusive language. For example, if you're talking to a group of people, think about we versus saying you to refer to the group. Avoiding hate speech, not to demean entire groups of people. You could use your platform to promote social awareness and highlight social issues. And you should employ respectful free speech.
So I think everyone understands to avoid hate speech, because when you say that, it even sounds terrible, right? Hate speech.
Yes. Yes,
But do
yes.
you think that we sometimes do this accidentally?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are dog whistles. And so sometimes the hate speech is not so overt. And it's kind of like people allude to statements that have an underlying bias or an underlying message or an underlying connection to something that you can't say the real thing. So you say something that kind of alludes to it. And then if you get called out, it's like, well, I didn't say that. I said something else.
So you really
So
have to be paying attention and be plugged in to hear
yes,
hear the text and hear the subtext.
yes. And also have be aware of the historical context behind some of the statements. So for example, the Florida governor's race, there are two candidates running for governor in the state of Florida. Well,
It's an
one
open seat
candidate,
because the person who has been governor is term limited out, so he can't run
yeah,
again. So we have
yeah,
a Democrat and a Republican, just for people that don't know, that are running that have never served in that position before.
yes, yes. And so one of the candidates said, well, if you elect this other person, let's not monkey this thing up and elect this other person. Well, the person he was referring to was African American. So when he said, you're going to monkey this up, well, that's historically, that is a racialized language, because historically racists have used monkeys to refer to African Americans comparison to monkeys or as a racial slur. So now, could he have possibly just, that's the term that he uses and it had nothing to do with the race of, the person he's running against? Sure. But words have consequences. Should you know better? I hope so. And so, but it could
Okay,
be a dog whistle. You could throw it out there and say, well, I didn't mean it like that. But people who actually are racist could take that and be like, yeah, we like him. He said monkey.
so I'm going to ask you one more current events question, and you can dodge it if you want.
Okay.
Have you heard about the Megyn Kelly thing yet?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I followed that story because I was kind of, and for those who are listening in, Megyn Kelly, because Halloween is coming up, and every Halloween, the whole subject of cultural appropriation and culturally insensitive Halloween costumes, that's a big thing. And if you want to be a certain person for Halloween, is it appropriate to darken your skin and use blackface? Well, the history of blackface has a very ugly, deep, racialized past, and blackface is never okay. But people sometimes, for Halloween, they want to do the whole blackface thing. What Megyn Kelly said, and help kind of clarify this for me, she said she didn't understand, she didn't think blackface was a bad thing.
She didn't understand why it was bad on Halloween.
Right.
And
Right.
you were trying to be a specific person. So not if you're trying to
Right.
be a race, but if you were trying to be Diana Ross.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yes. And so, I mean, again, if you don't have an understanding of the historical context, that may fly over your head. You may be like, well, what's the big deal? It's a Halloween costume. But it is a big deal to a lot of people. And really, as citizens and consenting adults and free humans, we just all have to decide, if you know something is offensive to a lot of people, and you know that it is something that will be taken the wrong way, do you say, well, I don't care, I want to do what I want to do, be offended? Or do you say, okay, let me project the right message? Because with communication studies, we talk about messaging in terms of it should be appropriate and effective. Because the goal of a communicator is to send a message in a way that people understand what you are trying to say. So if you're like, I'm going to say it however I want to say it, and however you take it is on you, that's not competent communication. It's not ethical communication, and you won't get your point across, and you're going to have a lot of conflict throughout your life because people are never going to take it the way that you want them to take it. It's just going to be, you're going to blurt stuff out. People are going to be offended or not understand you correctly, and you're going to spend a lot of time discussing and or clarifying your message. And I don't like to do that. I like to try to say it in a way that it will be understood the first time.
It saves
I
you
have
some
no
work in
desire.
the end.
Yes, yeah, instead of trying to clean it up. Because another thing with comm studies, they always say in communication studies courses, communication is irreversible and you cannot not communicate. So once you put it out there as far as being irreversible, you can't take it back. It's like if your friend says, "Do you like my dress?" and you're like, "It's ugly," and then like, "What? Oh, I didn't mean that. I meant," and you try to clean it up, but the way you said it first, it was already out there. And so, and then you could not communicate, even if you say, "I'm just not going to say anything." And one of the examples, I don't think we had time to go over it, but like with the First Amendment, one of the examples that I saw on the website, the Freedom Forum, if you refuse to stand for the national anthem, is that, can you be fired for that? And is that a violation of the First Amendment? So that's another one of those kind of gray areas, because the act of not standing, you technically didn't say anything, but it was more symbolic communication. So you are making a statement. So when you think about, communication and ethical communication, the things that you do also can send a message. And so you technically, according to the constitutional expert, you cannot be fired. They cannot force you to stand for the anthem. But in Colin Kaepernick's case, because people in the league felt that it sent the wrong message, they decided not to sign him. And I know nothing about football, so I don't even know the right terms. I just for the commercials,
and
I just
the important term, right, which was money.
Yes, exactly. So so money plays a role, but it's interesting because money kind of runs everything around us. But Nike came back and capitalized, and they gave him that huge endorsement deal, and he's the face of Nike and Just Do It. And so there's that. And Nike made a lot of money from that. But on the flip side of that, Nike contributes to, not necessarily Nike, but maybe some of their top executives contribute a lot of money to conservative, Republican and conservative campaigns.
So they're making money off both sides.
Yeah, so they're making money from both sides. And I mean, loyalty, no, the loyalty is to money. Like, we can capitalize on the people that support Colin Kaepernick by making him the face of this campaign, and our sales will soar. And then we'll take that money and we'll funnel it into the political campaigns that we choose. And everybody's, we're just kind of.
So on the webinar that Allegra Davis Hanna led, she said, always go do your research. And it kind of sounds like that's where you're going to, even with what people speak, or even with what they're advertising. You should go do your research.
Yes. Because if you really support Colin Kaepernick's message and the kneeling protest, and then you see Nike and you're like, "Oh, I'm going to buy Nike." Well, Nike as a company, they're not really supporting the policies. They're not supporting candidates that are supporting the policies that Colin Kaepernick is pushing for. So if you support Colin Kaepernick, you got to make sure that if you don't want to give money to a company that's going to try to, that's going to funnel money into campaigns that you don't necessarily agree with, Nike may not be the company that you want to give your money to, if that makes sense.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. But it was a good one. Nike came out on top. The winner was Nike. So, interesting. So to kind of wrap up the final thoughts on this, your freedom of speech must be balanced with your responsibility as a speaker to respect your audience. Because if you offend or degrade the values of your audience members, you're not going to meet your speech goals. So if your goal is to inform someone, if you degrade them and use hate speech and use unethical language, you're not informing them. You just offended them, and it's causing divisiveness. Same thing with persuasion. You can persuade with the facts, but if you have to go into using fear tactics or divisive language, hate speech, misrepresentations of the truth, you're not being an ethical communicator, and you're not really persuading people appropriately. And that goes into the logical fallacies.
When the First Amendment tells you can say something, it doesn't always mean it's a good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to have that conversation in your head and not let it come out of your mouth. I mean, there's a saying, you should measured twice and cut once. So maybe think about what you're going to say and think about the most appropriate way to say it instead of just blurting something out. Because once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's very difficult to put it back in. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So
Good advice.
I've learned that the hard way. I have a toddler who found a tube of toothpaste and she decided to.
No.
So yeah, literally and figuratively, you cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube. So
good to know.
Yes.
So thank you, Professor Adderley. This has been really interesting and really fun.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you to all the students who are watching right now. And thank you to Allegra Davis-Hanna, who's also apparently on our message board.
Yay. Hi, Allegra.
So if students have any questions, they can go ahead and type those now. But if you don't, I wanted to remind you guys that next week is the end of early voting. So you have 2 chances to come vote with TCC Connect faculty. We are going to be walking to vote on November 1st at 11 a.m. and then November 2nd at 1 p.m. That is a Thursday and a Friday. So if you can vote in Tarrant County, bring your ID, bring your voter card, come meet us at the coffee shop, and then we'll all go walk to vote together. It should take 30 minutes of your time and then you're done. If you can't come to do it with us, please just go vote. You have until November 2nd to early vote, and that is the best and easiest time to do it. Or you can wait till Election Day. But if you do that, know that you have to go to the precinct. So make sure you read your voter card. It'll tell you exactly where to go. All right, it looks like we didn't have any student questions this time. All right, well, thank you, Professor Adderley, and have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.